So, I realize I'm what's between the cocktails and the white wine and the beer and everything, so let me be short. Till and Arjun asked me to talk about entrepreneurship at large, which obviously is an easy and very specific little subject. So let me try to share 3 perspectives, a couple of stories, and a tribute with you here today. First, I want to start off a little on the role of the entrepreneur, because I mean nowadays seems to be a lot of confusion around that. What is entrepreneurship about? I speak to a lot of politicians, and for politicians, entrepreneurship is about creating jobs. If you talk to VCs, their logic is and should be to get financial return on their investments. If you talk to product designers, they just love to do great product. But I think they're all kind of missing what's really at the core of entrepreneurship and the role of entrepreneurs like us. And that is that entrepreneurship is about the new. Very simple. In our society, we're so focused on our established institutions and all the big companies, etc. But at the core, entrepreneurship is about creating the new. It is about changing things. It is about making things make sense in the world we live in today. It is the people who go out on new quests to use new technology for new things that the establishment didn't see possible. It is about experimentation, right? It's about failing. It's about testing out. We are the little organism sitting on top of the big organism, trying out new things. Now and then we fail, now and then we become the big organism in itself. Or as one of our great leaders at one point said, we are the crazy ones who are ready to challenge the status quo. But now and then you kind of get a little confused. And I've been an entrepreneur almost 20 years, and back in the .com period, I started like one of the earliest internet companies in Europe in '95. I was 17 years old, crazy stuff going on. But in the end of the '90s, I really couldn't, suddenly entrepreneurship became about only making money for me. All my friends were sitting at dinner tables, and there was like a net worth of hundreds of millions of euro around the table. And I'd sort of been doing it before any one of them, and I was just sitting there and suddenly, the whole perspective just became about, not missing out and making that quick exit or whatever. It led to very weird stuff like doing an e-commerce company selling cosmetics online or something like that. We managed to flip the company around and make it into an e-commerce software company. But it's really the most desperate phase I've ever been in terms of entrepreneurship. And it really led me to this kind of deep, profound depression around, the beast called capitalism and the .com boom, where people were doing the most evil things to each other, and old friends were backstabbing themselves just to make that quick exit in that phase. Back then, at one point, I read a fantastic book called The Utopian Entrepreneur by a great design legend called Brenda Laurel, worked at Interval Research and Apple and other places. And her simple kind of insight, which for me led me on the next 10 years of my life, was really simple and very applicable to any technology-based entrepreneur. And that is that first we create the tools, then the tools create us. First we create the tools, then the tool starts creating us. And it had this profound impact on, every little design decision we make, every little marketing decision we make, every little worldview we put into our products, our values we put into the products, the world we see that we live in, that we put into the products, ends up having tremendous scope. Facebook might be just some social platform today, but 10, 15 years ago, the idea of people sharing publicly with other people were profoundly challenging. So, especially as technology entrepreneurs, we have an amazing opportunity to create the tools that really foster the culture of the society we live in. And I think this is especially applicable in terms of Europe, right? Because our big problem in Europe is that the new is very small. We don't create the big new companies that becomes the establishment. We often sell them at an early stage, or we fail to get there at all, right? We haven't created a new 10,000 person company in Europe the last 10 years like they have in the US, lots and over, and that's really what we should be focused on as a continent, I think. So, on to what you should be working on or what you should work for. We live in a crazy world today where the entry barrier is so low that you see a startup doing a farm, software as a service management tools for a farm, and then they pivot into a collaboration thing, and the next month you see them doing something else, right? And it's kind of perplexing for me, because I mean, is that what entrepreneurship is about? Obviously, it's about trying out new things. So let me introduce you to the idea of the entrepreneurial stack. In software and technology, we have the idea of the stack, the operating system, the middle layers, and the high level and programming languages, etc. So, and this gets a bit confusing because I wasn't allowed to use slides, but we start with a feature. We get to the product, we get to the company, we get to the vision, we get to the value shift, and we get to the paradigm shift. Feature, product, vision, company, vision, value shift, paradigm shift. Nowadays, we seem to be a bit confused on what is a feature, what is a company, and what is it you really want to be betting on. And I mean, it's okay to start off on a feature, but you really want to be trying to find that vision of what it is you're doing, of the company you're about. You want to try and figure out what is actually the paradigm shift you're betting on that makes this into not just another feature company, but makes it into that thing that could become like one of the big great companies, becomes what the employees of your company wants to be a part of doing, apart from your stock options and the salary and all that. So let me share a couple of examples with you, just to get you an idea of how you can kind of try to navigate that. About 10 years, actually almost today, 10 years ago, we were very excited about the very first camera phones that came out, Nokia camera phones. You could take a photo, you could press a button, and about 30 seconds later, you would have shared your photo with the world. It was wild and perplexing. I remember we wrote blog posts saying like, this will change the world. And I mean, today it's like 40% of the activity on Twitter, 40% of the activity on Facebook, photo sharing. And even though photo sharing gets a lot of bad rap these days for not yet another photo sharing app. What we were doing was just a little hack. It was a little feature. It was a little Perl script or whatever it was that hacked it together so that we could publish to a blog. But we were immensely excited about it. It ultimately led us to discovering this whole paradigm of visual sharing. And to creating a company called 23 that builds tools for visual sharing, a hit product called 23 Video that allows organizations to build video websites like buildted.com in a day or two. So, I mean, we started out at just being a feature, playing around, having a good fun time, experimenting, and then eventually we kind of found our paradigm. I mean, the paradigm of shifting from textual to visual communication. It's like a 200 years paradigm shift. And I mean, it's early, it'll be early in 20 years still in terms of how organizations are shifting from the textual communication to the visual in everything they do in their company, in their organizations. So your challenge as entrepreneurs is really to figure out what level you are. In Podio, we were basically betting on tools for work becoming personal and empowering again. So it's basically two very simple value shifts that from control and management, that the tools of the new generation would be about empowerment. Like the Office suite and the Excel and the spreadsheet and the word processor were in the 80s. It was about empowering the individual to create their own tools. Then we had a big wave of centralization and all kinds of advanced stuff, and we were basically just betting on that. But betting on value shifts are an amazing thing because the establishment can't really adopt a value shift because they've set up the whole logic of their organization. The whole product philosophy is about managing things. It's about controlling things. So it's a profound thing to be betting on. We're betting on empowerment of the individual and openness within organizations. It's still early. We probably sold out too early, but I mean, it's going to have an impact for the next decade or two still. So really focus about where you are in the stack. How do you find out? You know, how do you move from being a feature to being a real product? How do you move from being a product to something that's actually a sustainable company, perhaps with multiple products? And how do you really find what it's really about on your vision, etc.? Because, I mean, it might be that we live in a world where we focus on the quick flip and the exit and the 3 years, etc. But I mean, most companies that are awesome or great, even if they're sold at some stage, people will have worked about 10, 15 years in the companies. Podio seems like this amazing story from 3 years from a basement in Copenhagen that used to be a pot club into like an exit 3 years later, but it was actually 10 years of work. I mean, I'd been building prototypes of what Podio was 10 years earlier. John, the co-founder of Podio, had been working and experimenting with social tools. John will ultimately have spent 10, 15 years of his life on this idea, right? So make sure what you do actually matters, because you are going to spend a hell of a long time on it. Last perspective to finish off is the most important piece of advice I've learned the last almost 20 years on entrepreneurship. And that advice comes from a slightly interesting angle, which is the 60s and the counterculture. And an amazing guy called Timothy Leary, who was like the early pioneer of LSD. And he had one very simple advice when you were going on an LSD trip, and that was to find the others. Find the others. You know, that you weren't going on some weird trip of your own, but you were out there to find humanity, to find companionship, to become more human on this trip instead of fucking up your mind. And the more you think about it, entrepreneurship and startups is really like the wildest trip you can be on, right? I mean, you're doing stuff you've never done before. You're out there trying to find the others, find your co-founders, find your collaborators. You're going to do stuff you've never tried before, and now and then it is kind of almost like a drug, right? Once you've tried it, you never go back. So in all the companies I'm involved in, we always talk about finding the others, right? Because you need to find your co-founders. And yeah, you don't find them by putting up a poster down in Kreuzberg, which seems to be like the trick nowadays in Berlin. Technical co-founder wanted, you see on the streets, right? You need to find them. You need to find your team. You need to find the early ambassadors of your idea. You need to find the early customers that are willing to go on the journey with you. And it is a journey, right? It is a trip. It's not like 18 months or 12 months. It's a long trip, and it's going to be really challenging. One example of this is an amazing company I'm involved in that's called Upbeat. 2 guys out of SF and Copenhagen. And when I joined up with them, I told them that companies at this stage should spend half their time out finding the others. And I mean, that's just, you know, bullshit one says, right? It's theoretically correct, and everyone should do it, but no one really does. But Ron and Rasmus, they actually did it. So they were out, you know, they're building a tool to do ops, to operate web apps and websites. DevOps, every developer is now also an ops person. And you know, they've actually never really scaled anything to hundreds of millions of users or anything. So they hadn't actually ran a big ops setup before. So what were we looking for? We were looking for those guys who actually had done that, right? The CTOs of the greatest companies in the world that actually knew everything about how to run big, complex ops setups, so that we could put that all into a product that would empower all the small startups and the early companies to learn from all their lessons. So they went out hunting just to meet with all the interesting CTOs, asking questions. How do you do ops? What tools do you use? What is the greatest lessons you've learned the last 5 years of building this company? And to begin with, our perspective was like, yeah, we'll get to the best CTOs in Europe because we kind of know them and we could kind of get introductions, etc. But then eventually it became like a New York thing, it became an SF thing, and I mean, we're just about to announce, you know, that we have 4 angel investors on board who's built some of the biggest services in the world, right? They're built services with billions of users within a very short period of time. So you're looking for those, you know, the best people in the world to be on your team. You're not only looking for capital or any, you know, you're looking for those people that actually should be on this trip together with you, right? And ultimately, that ended up being way more than we actually had imagined to begin with. So being out there, finding the others, is what it's all about. Also, in terms of recruiting, I mean, with Podio, we basically, I mean, based in Copenhagen, we basically just went scouting all of Europe and told them, you know, there's sun in Copenhagen, there's the best restaurant in the world, there's bikes, there are all kinds of good things in Copenhagen. Come here, and let's try to prove that you can build a giant internet company out of Europe. We probably sold a bit too early for that also, but who knows? So let me end on basically a tribute to the city we're in today, Berlin. Because there seems to be a lot of confusion around what Berlin is about. And I mean, I live in Copenhagen, so I'm totally an outsider on this perspective. But Berlin has this amazing energy in the moment and a lot of explanations on why it's happening. And I think there's actually a profound insight for all other cities that you guys might come from. And that is that the story of Berlin, or the official story, is that Berlin is cheap. Real estate is cheap. Offices are cheap. But you know, having the surplus thing of actually having companies in Copenhagen, Helsinki, Stockholm, I can tell you that story is not true. You know, office rentals are higher in Berlin than they are in Copenhagen, believe it or not. Talent, there's amazing access to talent. Well, I mean, we're all fighting for the talent in Berlin, right? So no. There are all these kind of weird explanations for why Berlin is happening. And what I think it's really about is that Berlin today is about community. It's not more than that. It's a city on a big journey, on a trip, coming together, helping each other. And I think that's the magic that I'm currently seeing in Berlin. Young entrepreneurs, proven entrepreneurs, willing to spend that hour together with the new guy that just arrived to town, hooking him up with everyone, sharing their lessons learned, angel investing perhaps if possible. So what I see is a community that's really investing in each other, not only financially, they're building something together. And that's when interesting things in cities really can grow. In Copenhagen, you know, a lot of the stuff that has happened in Copenhagen was basically 5 guys 15 years ago doing web agencies, myself included. Suddenly the perspective just changed to like doing product companies, then it became like doing a global product company, and eventually it became like, okay, what we think we can do is to build global disruptive companies out of a very small city in Europe. So that is what happens when a community really comes together. And you know, the story of Berlin isn't about government support programs, incubators, and what have not. It's about a community coming together. And I think that's really important for all of us to think about in our respective cities. How can we grow as a community to get all of us to grow together? Thank you.